Wang Wei, farewell to Prefect Li, who leaves to take up his post at Zizhou. In 10,000 ravines, ancient trees touch the sky. 1,000 mountains fill with sad cuckoos calling. After a night of rain in those mountains, water pours from the branches like 100 streams. Han women will pay their taxes in tongue cloth. Bar men will sue each other over taro fields. The old literary gentleman transformed them in his day. Build on his old achievements to make yours new. So here we have another of Wang Wei's pentasyllabic regulated poems. This one comes with a slight difference. Now, this poem has a lot of landscape description, but nevertheless, we could say that that is not its main topic. So you could say this is a landscape poem, but that's not the main topic of the poem. The main topic, this is a parting poem. We've encountered a lot of them before. A scholar official says goodbye to another official. In this case, this Prefect Li is going to Zizhou, and I've consulted. Zizhou is what was a province or part of the territory of the province of Shu in the west of the country, which is a place we've had occasion to talk about before. Shu is a landlocked region in the west of China. Its capital is Chengdu. It was a relatively prosperous place during the Tang Dynasty, and it was the place where the Emperor Xuanzang had taken refuge after the fall of the capital to the barbarians and the rebels in the An-Lushan rebellion. Now, it wasn't quite in the heartland of ancient China, which is basically the Yellow River Valley. It was a bit to the west of that. In fact, it was a region that had been conquered and Sinicized during the Warring States period by the state of Qin. But at this time, you know, it's completely Sinicized, even though it might still have small groups of non-Sinicized populations in its midst, as is represented in this poem. So we've got a poem. The main topic of the poem is saying goodbye to this friend, but it takes a landscape descriptive form. Instead of, you know, dwelling on the typical topics of a parting feast, drinking wine, the sadness at parting, what Wang Wei is doing here is describing for Prefect Li the territory he is going to go to administer, and giving him a few pieces of advice about this. So interesting. It's you could say a slightly fresher way of developing this topic of parting poetry, mixing it with landscape poetry, with a slightly, I wouldn't say exotic, but a slightly regional flavor in the landscape, because this is not the central yellow river traditional Chinese landscape. It's not the south, which is also described in a lot of the poems, and which is clearly exotic for the people of the Yellow River Valley of northern China. This is slightly exotic, the moderately exotic western region, where there are still some barbarians and quaint cultural practices. Okay, as usual, let's explore the poem couplet by couplet. In 10,000 ravines, ancient trees touch the sky. 1,000 mountains fill with sad cuckoos calling. Okay, the first couplet feels parallelistic. I don't know if it is or it is not. Remember, in a Liu Xi, the only couplets that have to be rigidly parallelistic in word type and generally antithetic in semantic meaning are the two middle couplets. But the first one feels parallelistic. So we get two contrasting views of 10,000 ravines with very high trees and of 1,000 mountains filled with cuckoos calling. So one is a visual impression mostly, seeing the trees rising up in all those ravines. The other is an oral impression mostly. In those mountains that surround the ravines, lots of cuckoos crying. So quaint, slightly pathetic images of a wild, untamed nature. Remember, Shu, the region to which Prefect Li is going, is most of it, it's a flat land with rivers, but it is girdled, you could say, by mountains. So it's a mountainous area. The access, especially, is particularly difficult, having to cross through very high mountains and very straight mountain passes. So lots of rabbis will be seen there with enormous trees, and also birds will be heard singing, yeah, in the background, sad songs, yeah, so melancholy airs of this wild, only partially civilized region. Second couplet. After a night of rain in those mountains, water pours from the branches like 100 streams. Perhaps the climate is wetter there. You know, the central Yellow River Valley is quite a dry area in China, except for a few parts of the year. It's not a wet area. It doesn't rain a lot. It's quite dry. Most of the water, in fact, comes from dikes and canalizations of the Yellow River. This is a wetter area, probably, a place where it rains more commonly. And, just a quaint image of wetness and of rain is presented in this couplet. Yeah? After the night rains, a lot of rain has fallen, and, rivulets of water fall from every branch. And it's a lot of water flowing and flowing and flowing. Yeah? The next couplet moves from describing the natural surrounding to describing the social surrounding. In fact, you could divide the poem into the first two couplets, which generally depict the natural landscape Prefect Li is going to, and the last two couplets, which depict the social background as well as some advice on how to behave and administer, given by Wang. Han women will pay their taxes in tong cloth. Ba men will sue each other over taro fields. So this is very clearly parallelistic, and it's very easy to see here. Han, ba, women, men, pay, sue. Tong cloth, taro fields. The parallelism is quite visible, even in the translation. So this couplet depicts some of the people who live there, and it depicts them from the point of view of exoticism. Of course, this region, Shu and its capital Chengdu, were quite civilized from Chinese standards at this time during the Tang Dynasty, but it had not been part of the old heartland in the time of the Zhou Dynasty, for example. It had started to be colonized, as I said, in the late Warring States period. In the Han Dynasty, in the early Han Dynasty, it was colonized even more, and more territories more territories in that periphery were brought into the empire. So there is this quaintness being evoked, and two elements are presented of this exoticism in this region. First, the Han women. Han is refers to the Han Dynasty, but it's used as an adjective to describe the main Chinese ethnic group. I mean, the Chinese, generally the Han, the Han ethnicity. So Han women will pay their taxes in tong cloth. Now, taxes were paid in different ways in Imperial China. The most commonly accepted, especially in periods of economic stability, way of paying taxes was with money, although there were some places and sometimes in areas where you could pay taxes in not in money, but in products. So, for example, in hemp or in silk, or in things that the farmers could make with their own hands, and grain, for example. So it seems that one of the customs here is that women pay their tax contribution in tong cloth. I don't know what tong cloth is. I have no idea whatsoever. I would have to take a look at the Chinese version of the poem. Tongs are a type of shoes or a type of strap that is put on sandals. So I don't know if the poem is referring to that type of cloth, which might have been a typical cloth that was specially produced in Shu, or maybe tong is, just a Chinese word, a type of cloth that is being translated literally in this translation. But anyway, the women are paying their taxes in that type of cloth, not in hemp and silk, which is what most women would use for paying their taxes in the heartland areas of the empire. What about men? Ba men will sue each other over taro fields. So Ba men, the region of Shu was also called Ba. Well, it was divided into two ancient regions, Shu and Ba, which were meant to be primitive kingdoms before the time of the Qin absorption of these territories. So I imagine by Ba men, what is meant here is tribal men, members of the non-Han ethnic group. So those people of the ethnic in local populations sue each other, so are very litigious over taro fields. I imagine this reflects a lack of available agricultural land for these groups of people. Perhaps there isn't that much agricultural land if not in Shu, in the region obviously Zhou, where the prefect is going. Remember, parts of Shu are very mountainous. There is an element of exoticism in what they are cultivating in their fields. Taro root. So taro is a type of, it's not a tuber exactly, but it grows beneath a plant. It might be a tuber, yeah. I'm not an expert in botanic. But, you know, it's a type of starchy food that grows in the form of little root-like appendages of a plant, the taro plant, under the earth. And I imagine it might have been suited for the wetter, perhaps semi-tropical climate of this region. And that's what they dispute in. So this is not an area of wheat and millet. This is not an area of silk and hemp, the typical products that men and women cultivate in the central region. This is an area of tongue cloth and taro fields. Anyway, last couplet, and the last couplet synthesizes the advice, or distills the advice that Wang wants to give to the prefect on how to govern the area. And again, it connects with historical views of the area. The old literary gentleman transformed them in his day. Build on his old achievements to make yours new. Now, I've checked, this old literary gentleman, I don't remember, Wang or something like that, Wang or something like that, was a representative of the central government, a scholar official bureaucrat that was sent into this region during the Western Han Dynasty, more specifically during the reign of Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty, who sent his armies in continuous campaigns to expand the empire in the north and the southwest. So at that time, as we've said before, the region was still very partially Sinicized. It had been absorbed by the kingdom of Qin just before the unification. I mean, maybe 100 years before the unification of the Han Dynasty. And so under Emperor Wu, troops were sent and governors were sent to, pacify and cultivate these regions. And of course, the discourse, the political discourse from the center is always, in Chinese political theory, it's always like you cultivate the barbarians, you make them more civilized by, incorporating them into China proper, transforming them into more polished, more cultured human beings. So this governor, this old literary gentleman who had a biography in some of the histories from the Han Dynasty, was a governor sent by the Han Emperor, who was quite successful. At least the historical chronicles paint him as quite successful at governing this region of Shu and at civilizing it a bit. So Wang Wei is saying, follow the footsteps of this great guy of the Han Dynasty, now in the Tang Dynasty. Do like him, culture these people, rule them well. So yeah, altogether not a bad poem, especially in its unusual take of subject matter for a poem that is about parting. So it's actually, you could say the real topic in this poem is not parting, it's describing the land of Shu for its prospective governor, or at least the governor or a part of it. But quite interesting.